Captain Lee Dong-woo stood in the command center of his ship, watching the orange flames spread across the surface of New Seoul Colony. The flames were getting bigger and brighter as more buildings caught fire. He had been ordered to stay back and just watch. He was not allowed to help the people down there who were screaming and running from the Vulcan soldiers. The Vulcans were tall gray aliens with 4 arms and red eyes. They wore black armor and carried energy weapons that could melt through steel walls. They had been attacking human colonies for 3 years now, always taking what they wanted and leaving death behind them. The worst part was that Earth kept telling everyone to stay calm and be nice to the aliens. Lee Dong clenched his fists as he watched another explosion light up the colony. His crew members stood around him looking angry and frustrated. They all wanted to fight back, but their orders were clear. Stay peaceful, be diplomatic, do not make the aliens more angry. These were the same orders they had received 17 times before, as 17 different human colonies burned down the communication screen. Ambassador Park Hae-jin was talking to the Vulcan commander. The alien was laughing at her. Her voice stayed calm and polite, even as the colony burned behind the Vulcan ship. She kept saying things like, "Please consider our proposal and we hope for peaceful resolution." The Vulcan commander just kept laughing and making jokes about weak humans. Hae-jin had been doing this job for 5 years now. She had given the same polite speeches over and over again. The aliens always responded the same way. They would laugh at her, they would insult humans, they would attack another colony a few weeks later. She had memorized every diplomatic phrase in the book, but none of them seemed to work on species that only understood violence. What the Vulcans did not know was that Park Hae-jin had also memorized the locations of every Vulcan military base. Every time she met with them for peace talks, she was actually gathering information. Her diplomatic team included several people who were very good at hacking alien computer systems. While she talked about peace treaties, her team was downloading. Vulcan Military Secrets Commander Kim Tae-ho sat in his private cabin reading files that were marked with the highest security level. These files contained information that would shock most humans. They showed that Earth had been building weapons in secret for 30 years. The weapons were hidden in asteroid mining stations and research facilities scattered throughout the solar system. The files showed pictures of massive battleships that looked nothing like the peaceful trade vessels that Earth usually flew. These ships had weapons that could destroy entire planets. They had shields that could stop any known alien technology. They had engines that could move faster than anything else in the galaxy, but they all sat hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Kim Tae-ho had spent 10 years helping to design these secret weapons. He knew exactly how powerful they were. He also knew that Earth could have stopped the Vulcan attacks at any time. The decision to let the colonies burn was not about weakness, it was about strategy. Earth was letting the Vulcans think they were winning while secretly preparing for total war. The commander looked at pictures of the Vulcan ships and smiled. The aliens thought that technology was superior to human technology. They were wrong. Human engineers had been studying captured Vulcan equipment for years. They had found weaknesses in every system the Vulcans used. The secret human weapons were specifically designed to exploit those weaknesses. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Song Ma-young was walking into the most secure building on the planet. The Global Defense Council met in a room that was buried 3 miles underground. The room had no windows and walls made of metal that could stop nuclear weapons. 20 people sat around a large table and every one of them looked angry. The Admiral placed a datapad on the table and activated a holographic display. The display showed the burning colony of New Seoul. It also showed reports from the other 16 colonies that had been destroyed. The numbers were terrible. 3 million humans dead, entire cities wiped out, families torn apart. Yet Earth had done nothing but send angry letters. Song Ma-young had been waiting for this day for 15 years. She had helped create the plan that would end the Vulcan threat forever. The plan required patience and sacrifice. It meant letting some humans die so that all humans could eventually live in safety. The plan was almost ready to begin. She looked around the table at the other council members. These were the most powerful people on Earth. They controlled armies and navies that most humans did not even know existed. They had been building secret bases on the moon and Mars. They had been training soldiers for a war that the public thought would never come. The Admiral cleared her throat and spoke in a voice that was calm but filled with anger. The Vulcans have crossed the final line. New Seoul was supposed to be protected by the peace treaty. They attacked it anyway. They killed civilians who were trying to surrender. They are not interested in peace. They only understand violence. One of the council members asked if they should try diplomatic talks one more time. Song Ma-young shook her head and smiled, but it was not a kind smile. She had been pretending to be a peaceful military leader for too long. She was tired of pretending. She was ready to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of. When they stopped being polite, the vote was unanimous. Protocol courtesy end would begin immediately. Every human ship in the galaxy would receive new orders. Every human colony would activate its hidden defenses. Every human diplomat would stop saying please and thank you. The time for being nice was over. The time for war had begun. Song Ma-young sent the activation code to every human military commander in the galaxy. The message was simple: stop pretending to be weak, start showing them what we really are. The Vulcans think they are fighting merchants and farmers. They are about to learn they have been fighting soldiers who were ordered to hold back. As the meeting ended, the Admiral looked at the display showing New Seoul 1. More time, the colony was still burning, but soon it would be the Velkans who were running from flames. The galaxy was about to learn that Earth politeness was a choice, not a weakness, and that choice had just been taken away. The transformation would begin in 6 hours. Every human in the galaxy would stop acting peaceful and start acting like the warriors they had always been. The Velkans wanted to see what humans were really like. They were about to get their wish. Captain Yoon Seo-gin received the message at exactly midnight Galactic Standard Time. The words appeared on his screen in bright red letters. Protocol courtesy end activated. Remove all limitations. Begin true operations. He had been waiting 3 years to see those words. Now his hands were shaking with excitement as he typed his response. Understood. Dropping the mask. Now the merchant ship Peaceful Trade had been floating near the Velkan military station Zephyron base for 6 months. The Velkans thought it was just another human cargo vessel delivering food supplies. They had grown used to seeing human ships everywhere in their territory. The humans always seemed so harmless, always asking permission for everything, always apologizing when they made mistakes. Yoon Seok-jin walked to the cargo bay and placed his hand on a scanner that had been hidden behind a false panel. The scanner read his fingerprints and DNA, then opened a door that the Velkans had never seen. The door led to a room filled with weapons that could destroy an entire planet. The room also contained armor and equipment that looked nothing like anything humans had ever shown to aliens. He put on the black combat armor and felt the power systems activate. The armor made him faster and stronger than any Velkan warrior. It also had stealth technology that could make him invisible to all known alien senses. As he suited up, his crew members were doing the same thing throughout the ship. Every person on the board was actually a highly trained special forces soldier. The cargo bay doors opened, and instead of food containers, the ship released a swarm of attack drones. The drones moved faster than Velkan fighters and carried weapons that cut through alien armor like paper. The Velkan base tried to activate its shields, but human hackers had been secretly planting viruses in their systems for months. The shields failed immediately. General Choi Yunbai watched from her command center on Titan as similar attacks began happening all across the galaxy. Human ships that had pretended to be civilian transports suddenly revealed massive weapon systems. Research stations that claimed to study peaceful technologies opened their doors to show armies of soldiers. Space stations that sold human art and music began launching fighter squadrons. The base on Titan had been disguised as a research facility for 20 years. Scientists came and went carrying equipment that looked like it was for studying rocks and ice. What they were actually doing was building the largest military installation in human history. The base contained enough weapons to fight a war against the entire galaxy. Choi Yun-bai had trained for this moment since she was 20 years old. She had pretended to be a peaceful researcher while secretly commanding an army of 50,000 soldiers. Every person on Titan knew how to fight, but they had all been acting like boring scientists for decades now. They could finally stop pretending. She activated the launch sequence and watched as thousands of stealth fighters poured out of hidden hangars. The fighters were painted black and moved silently through space. The Velkans had never seen technology like this because humans had kept it secret. The fighters headed toward 17 different Velkan systems, carrying enough firepower to level entire worlds. Commander Lim Junho stood on the bridge of the battleship Polite Request and smiled as his weapons systems came online. The ship had been pretending to be a diplomatic vessel for 5 years. It had attended peace conferences and cultural exchanges while secretly mapping every Velkan military installation in the galaxy. The ship's true weapons were hidden behind panels that looked like decorative artwork. When the panels opened, they revealed cannons that could punch holes through asteroids. The ship also carried 1,000 Marines who had been disguising themselves as diplomats and translators. Every person who had ever shaken hands with a Velkan leader was actually a spy or a soldier. Lim Junho had studied Velkan military tactics for his entire career. He knew how they thought and how they fought. The Velkans always used the same strategies. Because they had never lost a war, they thought their way of fighting was perfect. They were about to learn how wrong they were. His ship moved toward the Velkan fleet that was celebrating their victory over New Sol. The aliens were having a party because they thought they had scared the humans into permanent submission. They were drinking alien alcohol and laughing about how easy it was to conquer human colonies. They stopped laughing when human weapons started tearing their ships apart. The Velkan Emperor Vorthok was sleeping in his palace when the alarms started going off. His advisors ran into his bedroom with reports that made no sense. Human ships were attacking Velkan bases everywhere. The attacks were perfectly coordinated, and the humans seemed to know exactly where every important target was located. Vorthok had conquered 15 different alien species in his lifetime. He thought he understood how inferior species behaved when they were defeated. They usually begged for mercy or tried to hide in remote systems. They never launched coordinated attacks against superior enemies. The humans were doing something that should have been impossible. The reports kept coming in, and they got worse with each update. Human forces were not just attacking randomly. They were specifically targeting Velkan leadership and military infrastructure. They knew the locations of secret bases that even most Velkans did not know about. They were fighting like they had been planning this war for decades. What terrified the Emperor most was that the humans were winning. Every Velkan ship that engaged human forces was destroyed or damaged. Human weapons were more advanced than anything in the Velkan military. Human tactics were more sophisticated than anything Vulcan generals had ever seen. It was like fighting an enemy that could see the future. On the diplomatic front, Ambassador Kong Soyoung walked into the Galactic Council chamber with a smile that made every alien representative feel uncomfortable. She had spent 5 years in this room being polite and asking nicely for peace. Now she had a very different message to deliver. The other ambassadors expected her to beg for help or ask for mediation to stop the fighting. Instead, she stood at the podium and spoke in a voice that was calm but somehow terrifying. She told them that humanity had tried asking nicely for 3 years. The aliens had chosen to respond to politeness with violence. Now humanity would try a different approach to communications. She explained that every human death in the colonies would be paid back with interest. Every destroyed building would be rebuilt using Vulcan resources. Every family that had been torn apart would receive compensation from Vulcan treasuries. The bill for 3 years of human patience was now due, and payment was not optional. The alien representatives sat in shocked silence as they realized that humanity's diplomatic weakness had been an act. The humans had been studying every species in the galaxy while pretending to be harmless traders. They had been preparing for war while everyone else thought they were preparing for peace. Kong Soyoung finished her speech by explaining the new rules of human diplomacy. Humans would still be willing to talk and negotiate, but from now on the conversation would start with the understanding that refusing to cooperate with human requests was the same as choosing to be an enemy. At the time for pretending to be weak was over. As she left the council chamber, the other ambassadors began making urgent calls to their home governance. They needed to make sure they were still on humanity's good side, because being on the bad side was clearly a very dangerous place to be. The galaxy was learning that humans had been much more patient than anyone had realized. Admiral Park Chan-woo stood in the command center of his flagship watching the holographic display show dozens of red dots scattered across the galaxy. Each red dot represented a Vulcan military leader who thought they were safe in their hidden bunkers and secret bases. They had no idea that human intelligence agents had been tracking their every movement for years. The Admiral had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. His task force consisted of 12 ships that had been disguised as civilian cargo haulers for the past decade. The ships looked old and slow from the outside, but inside they contained the most advanced technology humanity had ever created. Each ship could move faster than light and strike targets with pinpoint accuracy. Park Chan-woo activated the communication system and spoke to his captains in a voice that was calm but filled with deadly purpose. Today we begin what we call the correction. For 3 years, the Vulcans have been hunting our people. Now we hunt them. The difference is that we are much better at it than they. Our captain HFY received her target assignments aboard the stealth destroyer Silent Vengeance. Her ship was responsible for eliminating Vulcan commanders in the outer rim systems. The aliens had spread their leadership across 17 different star systems, thinking that distance would keep them safe. They were wrong. HFY had been studying Vulcan psychology and behavior patterns for 8 years. She knew how they thought and where they would try to hide. Her ship could become completely invisible to all known detection systems. It could appear inside a Vulcan base, kill the target, and disappear before anyone knew what had happened. The first target was General Krax, who had personally ordered the destruction of the human colony on New Busan. The Vulcan general was hiding in a fortress that was supposed to be impregnable. The fortress had shields that could stop nuclear weapons and defenses that could destroy entire fleets. What the fortress did not have was protection against a ship that could phase through solid matter. HFY activated the experimental phase drive and watched her ship pass through the fortress walls like they were made of smoke. She materialized inside the general private chambers and eliminated him before he could even reach for his weapon. The attack was so quick and quiet that the fortress guards did not realize their commander was dead until the next morning. By then, the Silent Vengeance was already 3 star systems away, preparing to eliminate the next target on the list. Meanwhile, Captain Bae Woo-sung was leading a squadron of fighters through the Vulcan home system. The fighters moved in formation that seemed to defy the laws of physics. They could change direction instantly without slowing down. They could become invisible at will. They could pass through enemy fire without taking damage. The Vulcan pilots tried to intercept the human fighters, but it was like trying to catch shadows. The human ships moved in ways that Vulcan training had never prepared them for. Every time the aliens thought they had a target locked, the human ship would simply vanish and reappear somewhere else. Bae Woo-sung had trained for this battle in virtual reality simulators for 12 years. The simulators had been programmed with every detail of Vulcan fighter tactics and technology. He knew exactly how fast Vulcan ships could turn and how quickly their weapons could lock onto targets. His own ship could do everything better. The squadron strike was surgical and devastating. They destroyed the Vulcan space defense platforms in less than an hour without losing a single fighter. The aliens I had never seen anything like human technology, because humans had been deliberately showing them inferior equipment for years. General, you and now coordinated the ground assault on the Vulcan Military Academy. The academy was where young Vulcans learned how to fight wars. The building was heavily defended and filled with the best soldiers the alien empire could produce. It should have been impossible for human forces to penetrate. What the Vulcans did not know was that human soldiers had been infiltrating their society for years. Some of them had even attended the military academy as exchange students while secretly gathering intelligence. The humans knew the layout of every room and the location of every weapon when their troops moved through an academy like they owned the place. They avoided the heavily defended areas and struck at points where the aliens were weakest. The attack was over in 30 minutes and not a single human soldier was injured. The Vulcan cadets surrendered without understanding how they had been defeated. So as Ali the general had spent 20 years studying alien military tactics and had found weaknesses in all of them. The Vulcans were predictable because they had never faced an enemy that could match their technology. Now they were facing an enemy that was far superior back on Earth. The Global Defense Council was receiving reports from across the galaxy. Every mission was succeeding beyond their wildest expectations. The Vulcan military was collapsing. Faster than anyone had predicted, the aliens were discovering that their advantages in technology and numbers meant nothing against superior strategy and planning. Admiral Song Myung reviewed the battle reports with satisfaction. The plan was working perfectly. The Vulcans were being systematically eliminated in an order that would cause maximum psychological damage to their remaining forces. Each successful attack made the survivors more afraid and less effective. The most important part of the plan was the message it sent to other alien species. The galaxy needed to understand that humanity's patience had limits. When those limits were reached, the response would be swift and overwhelming. The humans were not just defeating the Vulcans, they were making an example of them. Intelligence reports showed that other alien governments were already reconsidering their relationships with Earth. Species that had been neutral or slightly hostile were suddenly sending diplomatic messages, expressing their desire for friendship. The fear of becoming humanity's next target was spreading throughout the galaxy. The Vulcan leadership tried desperately to organize a counterattack, but they were fighting an enemy that seemed to know their every move. Human agents had infiltrated Vulcan communication networks years ago. Every order the aliens sent was intercepted and analyzed. Human forces always knew where the enemy would strike. Next, what terrified the Vulcans most was the realization that humans had been holding back during the previous 3 years of conflict. Every human defeat had been a lesson in Vulcan tactics. Every human retreat had been a strategic withdrawal to gather more intelligence. The humans had been playing a much longer game than anyone had realized. The war was not just about revenge for the destroyed colonies. It was about establishing a new order in the galaxy where humanity would never again be seen as weak or vulnerable. The message was clear to every species watching. Earth was done asking nicely. As the reports continued to flow in, Admiral Song Myung began planning the next phase of the operation. The hunting of individual leaders was just the beginning. Soon it would be time to destroy the Vulcan military completely and force their government to surrender. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humans stopped pretending to be civilized. News of humanity's true military power spread through the galactic communication networks faster than light itself. Ambassador Oh Joo-hoon found herself suddenly the most popular person in the galaxy as alien governments frantically tried to contact Earth. Species that had ignored human diplomatic messages for years were now begging for meetings. The crystalline Confederacy, which had refused to trade with humans because they seemed too primitive, sent an emergency delegation offering exclusive mining rights to rare crystal deposits. The Aquatic Alliance, which had laughed at human proposals for underwater cities, suddenly wanted to discuss joint colonization projects. So Ji-yoon sat in her office on the diplomatic station orbiting Alpha Centauri, watching her communication system flash with incoming messages from dozens of different species. Every message had the same desperate tone. Please confirm that our species is still considered friendly to humanity. We want to make sure there are no misunderstandings about our relationship. What amused her most were the messages from species that had been secretly helping the Vulcans. The insectoid hive had been selling weapons to the Vulcan military for 2 years now. They were claiming it had all been a mistake and offering to provide free weapons to human forces. Instead, the desperation in their communications was almost entertaining. The most interesting message came from the Ethereal Council, a group of energy beings who considered themselves superior to all physical species. They had never bothered to acknowledge human existence before. Now they were requesting an urgent meeting to discuss establishing formal diplomatic relations. Meanwhile, the Vulcans were discovering that their allies were abandoning them faster than their ships could flee human forces. The Reptilian Empire, which had promised military support, suddenly announced that they were withdrawing from all agreements with the Vulcan government. The official reason was budget constraints, but everyone knew the real reason was fear. The Vulcan Emperor Warthog sat in his war room surrounded by advisors who all looked terrified. The holographic display showed the locations of Vulcan forces throughout the galaxy, and the picture was not encouraging. Half of their military installations had been destroyed or abandoned. The other half were under constant attack by human forces that seemed to appear from nowhere. His military commanders tried to explain how the humans were winning, but none of their explanations made sense. Human ships moved faster than Vulcan sensors could track. Human weapons were more powerful than anything in the Vulcan arsenal. Human soldiers fought like they could predict. The future General Vex, his most experienced commander, explained that human forces were not just superior in technology. They were superior in strategy, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare. The humans had been studying Vulcan weaknesses for years while pretending to be harmless merchants and diplomats. The Emperor realized with growing horror that the humans had been playing a game that was far more complex than anyone had understood. Every human who had ever visited a Vulcan world had been gathering information. Every trade agreement had been an intelligence operation. Every cultural exchange had been preparation for war. What made it worse was that other alien species were now actively helping the humans. The tech, which had remained neutral in the conflict, suddenly began sharing advanced technology with human forces. The Silicon Fellowship offered to provide manufacturing support for human weapons systems. The Emperor tried to send diplomatic messages to other major powers asking for help, but the responses were all the same. Everyone was too busy trying to make sure they stayed on humanity. Good side, nobody wanted to risk becoming the next target of human military action on the planet Nexus Prime, which served as the informal capital of galactic politics. Emergency meetings were being held in secret conference rooms. Species representatives who had never agreed on anything before were now united by a single common concern: what did humanity really want, and how could they avoid making the same mistakes the Vulcans had made? The Avian Dominion, which controlled most of the galaxy's shipping lanes, announced new policies that gave human vessels priority access to all trade routes. The announcement came with no explanation, but everyone understood the message. Nobody wanted to risk inconveniencing the species that had just demonstrated the ability to destroy entire military organizations. Ambassador Quan Du Hyun attended these emergency meetings as Earth representative and found himself in the unusual position of being the most feared person in the room. Every other ambassador treated him with a level of respect that bordered on worship. They agreed to every proposal he made without argument. Proposals were reasonable requests for trade agreements, technology sharing, and mutual defense pacts, but the other species agreed to them because they were terrified of what might happen if they said no. The galaxy was learning that saying no to humans had consequences that nobody wanted to experience. Captain No Taekyung led the final assault on the Vulcan homeworld orbital defenses. The planet was protected by a network of weapons platforms that had taken centuries to build. The platforms were armed with the most powerful weapons the Vulcan military had ever created. The assault began at dawn with a coordinated strike by human forces. Approaching from 17 different directions, the Vulcan defenders had prepared for every type of attack they could imagine, but they had not prepared for weapons that could bend space and time. Human ships appeared inside the defensive perimeter without traveling through the space between the platforms, tried to target the attackers, but human stealth technology made their ships invisible to Vulcan sensors. Within 6 hours, the entire defensive network was destroyed. No Taekyung watched the last platform explode and felt a deep satisfaction. The Vulcans had thought their homeworld was impregnable. They had been wrong about that, just like they had been wrong about everything else involving human capabilities. The destruction of the orbital defenses sent a clear message to every government in the galaxy: humanity could reach any target anywhere at any time. No planet was safe from human retaliation if the species that lived there chose to make themselves enemies of Earth. As news of the homeworld attack spread, the last of the Vulcan allies officially withdrew their support. The Mechanical Collective announced that they were suspending all agreements with the Vulcan Empire. The Crystal Monarchy recalled their ambassador and closed their embassy. Emperor Vorthok realized that his empire was now completely isolated in a galaxy where everyone was afraid to oppose the humans. His military was in ruins. His allies had abandoned him, and his people were beginning to question whether continuing the war was worth the cost. The final blow came when his own military commanders began suggesting surrender. They explained that continuing to fight would only result in the complete destruction of their civilization. The humans had demonstrated that they could eliminate the Vulcan government entirely if they chose to do so. The first time in his life, Vorthok began to consider the possibility that he had made a terrible mistake in attacking the human colonies. The species he had thought were weak and primitive had turned out to be the most dangerous enemy his empire had ever faced. The galaxy was learning a lesson that would be remembered for generations. Never assume that a species' peaceful behavior means they are incapable of violence. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who choose not to fight until they have no other choice. The surrender came not through a great final battle, but through a simple message transmitted across all Vulcan communication networks. Emperor Vorthok appeared on screens throughout his empire, looking older and more defeated than anyone had ever. I've seen him. His voice shook as he spoke the words that ended 3 years of war. The Vulcan Empire formally surrenders to the human government. We accept all terms and conditions set forth by Earth leadership. We acknowledge that we have been defeated by a superior force, and we beg for mercy for our surviving population. President Moon Jae-kyung received the surrender message in her office on Earth, surrounded by the military leaders who had planned humanity victory. The room was silent as they listened to the alien emperor admit defeat. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone was celebrating the end of the war. But Moon Jae-kyung did not celebrate. She knew that winning the war was only the beginning. The real challenge would be establishing a new relationship with the galaxy that would prevent future conflicts. She had spent months preparing for this moment, and she knew exactly what needed to be done. The surrender ceremony took place on the neutral world of Harmony Station. The location was chosen because it had been the site of the first peace talks between humans and Vulcans 3 years earlier. Now it would be the place where the aliens formally accepted their defeat. Emperor Vorthok arrived with a small delegation. Of his remaining advisors, he looked around the station with obvious surprise. The building had been completely transformed. Human soldiers stood guard at every entrance and human flags hung from every wall. The message was clear about who was in control. Now President Moon Jae-hyung entered the ceremony hall wearing formal diplomatic robes. But everyone could see the military insignia that marked her as a veteran of the colonial wars. Her smile was polite, but her eyes were cold as she looked at the alien leader who had ordered the deaths of millions of humans. The surrender terms were read aloud by Admiral Song Myung, and they were not gentle. The Vulcan Empire would pay reparations equal to twice the value of everything they had. Destroyed human colonies would be rebuilt using Vulcan resources and Vulcan labor. The aliens would also surrender half of their territory to human control. More importantly, the Vulcans would acknowledge in writing that humanity was not a species to be underestimated ever again. The document would be distributed to every government in the galaxy as a warning about what happened to species that chose to make themselves enemies of Earth. Captain Song Hoonmin supervised the occupation of former Vulcan territories as human forces moved in to establish permanent bases. The aliens were not treated cruelly, but they were left with no doubt about who was in charge. Human soldiers patrolled their streets and human administrators managed their government. The occupation was called aggressive peacekeeping, and it sent a clear message to every species watching. Humanity could be reasonable neighbors or implacable conquerors, but the choice was no longer entirely up to the other species. The galaxy would have to prove it deserved the first option. What surprised many observers was how efficiently the humans managed their new territories. Vulcan worlds that had been poorly governed under the Empire suddenly began prospering under human administration. The aliens discovered that their new rulers were not interested in revenge but in creating a stable and productive relationship. Admiral Lim Soo-young established the new protocols for human diplomatic engagement. The rules were simple and clear. Human requests would be considered seriously and responded to promptly. Failure to respond appropriately would be interpreted as a sign of hostility. Hostile species would be dealt with accordingly. The protocols made it clear that humanity had learned from the Vulcan conflict. Earth would no longer waste time on endless negotiations with species that had no intention of cooperating. The new approach was more direct. If you want to be friends with humans, you act like a friend. If you want to be enemies, the consequences would be swift and severe. The Galactic Council formally offered Earth membership in the High Command, the exclusive group that controlled galactic politics and trade. The offer came with full voting rights and a permanent seat on the Security Council. It was an unprecedented honor for a species that had been considered primitive just months earlier. Ambassador Chen Min-young accepted the offer on behalf of humanity, but with conditions that made every other species uncomfortable. Earth would participate in galactic governance, but only on their own terms. Human representatives would not be bound by traditional diplomatic protocols that prevented effective action. The conditions included the right to use military force to protect human interests without seeking counsel, approval of the right to establish military bases in any system that requested human protection, and the right to impose economic sanctions on species that violated agreements with Earth. Other species accepted these conditions because they had no choice. The alternative was to have humanity operating outside the galactic government entirely, which was a much more frightening possibility. Nobody wanted to risk making the humans feel like they needed to solve problems without consulting anyone else. The transformation of galactic politics was swift and dramatic. Species that had been rivals for centuries suddenly began cooperating to avoid attracting negative attention from humanity. Trade disputes that had lasted for decades were resolved in days when both sides realized that continued conflict might annoy their new human neighbors. Captain Ko Yeon-woo commanded one of the patrol fleets that now protected the borders of human space. His ships no longer pretended to be civilian vessels. They were clearly military warships designed for combat. The sight of human patrols had become a symbol of the new galactic order. The patrols served multiple purposes. They protected human territory from potential threats, they demonstrated humanity continued military strength, and they reminded everyone else that Earth was always watching. Other species began to modify their behavior, knowing that humans were paying attention to everything that happened in their region of space. The final message, broadcast across all galactic frequencies, was delivered by President Moon Jae-hyung herself. She spoke from the bridge of the flagship Humanity's Will, surrounded by the military leaders who had won the war against the Vulcan. The message was brief, but it carried implications that every species understood. Earth was returning to normal diplomatic operations. The period of open warfare was over, but the lessons learned during that period would not be forgotten. Humanity hoped that the recent educational experience had been valuable for everyone involved. The message ended with a simple statement that became famous throughout the galaxy: we tried asking nicely and you chose to respond with violence. Now you know what happens when we stop asking nicely. We hope this knowledge will help you make better decisions in the future. The new galactic order was established on the foundation of mutual respect, backed by the understanding that disrespecting humanity was a mistake that no species could afford to make twice. The galaxy had learned that human politeness was a gift, not a weakness, and that gift could be withdrawn at any time. Years later, historians would debate whether humanity had been too harsh in their response to Vulcan aggression, But every species that survived the conflict understood the real lesson the most. Dangerous enemies are often the ones who give you every opportunity to avoid making them your enemy. The humans had tried diplomacy first. They had offered peace negotiations. They had attempted to find reasonable solutions to their conflicts. When all of those approaches failed, they had responded with a level of military force that shocked the entire galaxy. The galaxy was now a safer place for everyone, because every potential aggressor knew that attacking peaceful species might result in facing an enemy that was far more dangerous than they appeared to be. The age of assuming that diplomatic species were militarily weak had ended forever. Earth had established itself as the galaxy's ultimate peacekeeper, not through conquest but through the demonstration that some species were too dangerous to provoke. The lesson would be remembered for generations, and it would prevent countless future wars. The humans had achieved something that no other species in galactic history had managed. They had created peace through the strategic use of overwhelming force. Applied with surgical precision, the galaxy would never again make the mistake of confusing human restraint with human weakness.